James is going to talk about the Baptist. He's going to continue eating the tabbouleh that I made. And I'm going to go harvest some tomatoes because I noticed that one of the Tiny Tims was just loaded. I got lots of tomatoes off
just off one plant.
Just off one plant. So
impressive.
I'm going to go
I like those little tomatoes, Tiny Tims.
You like them?
I like them.
Okay.
I like almost any tomato. Anyway,
I knocked off another one by accident.
It'll ripen up. It's big enough, isn't it?
Yeah. I think so.
It's a fair size now. Anyway, the camera would have clicked off, I'm pretty sure, when I was talking about Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. This stuff comes semi-recommended. Don't buy this edition or anything like that. Get it out of the library or whatever. Yeah, this edition dates from 2006, reprint. So, yeah, like I've been trying to read Charles Dickens thing. Most of the Charles Dickens stuff I read in my lifetime. I read in just after I turned 20, so it was the summer of 1974. Dates do go back that far, incidentally. And I went through, I'd say, more than half of his novels. Some of them 300 and some pages. Some of them big galumping things, 700, 800 pages. But hammered through them and stuff like that. That's when I started kind of picking up a vocabulary. It wasn't too long after that where professors were saying in a paper, hey, what does that word mean? I think they were trying to catch me out, but of course they didn't know the word. Better vocabulary, that's English profs. English profs. I was undergrad. Since then, I've kind of added to my vocabularies, or whatever, in a variety of different languages. And it's passive vocabulary, but what the heck. I wouldn't want to be able to live in any particular language. I have a hard enough time surviving the English language, but I'm pretty good at reading languages, and then some languages I just study and so on and so forth. Ancient Akkadian, for example, so that's ancient Babylonian, ancient Assyrian, and so on and so forth. Anyway, Dickens, been trying to read one of the Dickens things I didn't get around to, and it's a struggle. Mark Twain, a later contemporary, of course, of Dickens, survived until maybe 1910 or something like that. Whereas Dickens died, I don't know, 1880 something. But I think Mark Twain lived a slightly longer life. But he was a smoker. I don't know what was wrong with Dickens. He had a poor childhood and probably didn't have proper nutrition. Anyway, Baptist ways. Like this is basically a history of the Baptist movement, and it's they put a socket away in roughly 500 pages, if you include the introduction or whatever, forward, stuff like that, and preface. 500 pages, but it's a fairly big format. You'll be bored to tears. I wasn't quite bored to tears, but I'm a little bit older than most people. They say when people get a little older, they can slug through stuff that they couldn't get through when they were a little bit younger. I know lots of stuff. When I was young, I'd get through 10 pages of it. And I kind of have to go through that now, get over that hump. 10 pages is lousy or it's boring or whatever. And if it's lousy, and if I think it's important for some people, like Dune, I'll be able to get over that hump. And it's lousy. Or if it's boring, but it's still important, like this thing, I'll get over the hump. And obviously I did. Check marks on all the pages. And that even includes preface, forward, and the index. See how that is? Index. Check. I go through the index. Why would I go through the index? I use it kind of as a review. You see what I'm saying? Now, most of these names I had never heard of before, and it'd be very hard for me to I remember them. Here's Dwight Lyman Moody. So, that's a name I recognize. So on and so forth. Cotton Mather of witch hunting infamy. Mather or Mather, I don't know how you say that last name. Marshall Mathers, isn't that Eminem? Yeah, I'm not sure related. James Madison's in here for some reason or another. Martin Luther's in here. So on and so forth. Adoniram Judson. An amazing first name. Chiang Kai-shek. I think he was something like at least putatively Christian. Could be wrong about that. Don't quote me on it. Check it out. Very interesting. Nikita Khrushchev's in there. The commies in the Soviet Union made the Anabaptists worship of the Baptists. Well, I think which was it? Baptists worship with the Anabaptists or vice versa. Didn't let them worship independently. One of those groups. Of course, the commies were pretty scummy with a variety of different religions. And, of course, there are a lot of posthumous fellow travelers who still are kind of soft-headed on communism, and going, like you get Edward Said, he's dead now, should have died of embarrassment. He died a long time ago, but his soul is still marching on, and he once wrote, and I can tell he believed it, that it was an absolute shame that the Soviet Union went down, because there was no one out there to enable terrorists. Well, he doesn't say enable terrorists, but that's what it worked out to in practice, and that's how it would have been if it still exists. You only have to look at scumbag Putin, who's assumed the mantle of the communists in Russia. And he's not just enabling terrorists, for example, that stupid chimp Assad, who used to be in power in Syria. But that stupid chimp Putin has been the biggest terrorist in the world, and over the long haul. So this is the first quarter of the 21st century. He actually started even before the 21st century started. He started hammering the Chechens, I believe, in late 1999. The Russians aren't native to Chechnya. It's not as though the Chechens moved in there as immigrants or whatever. They're very, very native to there. They picked a very poor religion to convert to. But, Joseph Stalin carted them all away in World War II, the Chechens, in cattle cars apparently, and did it in the space of less than a week, maybe 2-3 days. There weren't that many of them, but he was very efficient when he was doing things like ethnic cleansing and, well, frankly, genocide, class genocide as well as ethnic genocide. But that's the way commies tend to be. And because they're longer lasting, the overall effect has actually been worse than for the Nazis, strictly speaking. The Nazis were so virulent that the rest of the world kind of rose up, and most of the rest of the world rose up and kind of settled their hash, as they deserve. So the way I put it is Nazism is more virulent than communism, but in the long run, I suppose communism took way more victims. Very, like the Nazis, I'd call them authoritarian, bordering on totalitarian. The commies, totalitarian. It's originally those two movements were classed together, and then recently it's been kind of, there's no such thing as a totalitarian system. Tell that to Joseph Stalin, and tell that to Mao Zedong. Yeah? Tell that to him. And Ho Chi Minh and Pol Pot and that sort of stuff. And that's why communist regimes have tended to be so stable as opposed to Nazi, particularly fascist regime. It's pretty easy for the Italians, for example, to get rid of the fascist Benito Mussolini. He didn't have anything near a totalitarian system. But if you want to get rid, and believe me, anyone who has any sense wants to get rid of a communist system once it gets set up. If you want to get rid of it, you better get rid of it quickly, or else they start getting their tentacles into everything and literally choking people and movements off with those tentacles, actually killing. And then they set up their system of fear, and so on and so forth. They control religion, control the army, they control the economic system, they control the social system. On and on it goes. Every system, political system, I said that. So speaking of an awful person, Kublai Khan, or Kublai Khan, I start to say his name, but probably Kublai Khan, Lord of Xanadu. And I didn't know that Xanadu is actually, what's it called, Shangdu or something like that. It's a little place that he built north of Peking. Shangdu, exactly right. So it's a mispronunciation, misspelling, whatever. How do you gotta misspell Chinese stuff. You gotta transcribe it into Latin characters or something like that. Xanadu, Emperor of China. So Kublai Khan, kind of like a descendant of Genghis Khan and stuff like that. Khan has been used by Muslims, but I think it's supposed to be a Mongolian name. The Mongols were not originally Muslim. Eventually, the religion they got, most of them would have been Buddhism, stuff like that. And that's why they've been so non-virulent. Buddhism, by comparison with some of the other religions, for example Islam, is relatively non-virulent. I think the main problem with the Japanese virulence in leading up to World War II and through World War II was due primarily to Shintoism, but Buddhism is not totally innocent when it comes to violence, and neither is Christianity, but by comparison with Islam, both are paragons of collective virtue. This is full of information. It's part of a series, a brief history of whatever. And it seemed to have come out maybe 20 years ago. They're fairly short, they're paperbacks. This thing's about 250 pages and stuff like that. Let's see when it was put out. I've got 210. It's got to be 2010. What do you folks think? Made a mistake. Yeah, 2010. It must have been in a hurry or something like that. Or a little bit snoozy. 2010. 15 years ago. I kind of like these brief histories of whatever. If you're a specialist in this, in Chinese history, especially in this area. So I think it's called the Yuan dynasty. The Mongols actually ruled over China for it's over 100 years, I think. A lot of people don't understand it, like they're going around, well, China could have taken over the world under the Ming dynasty. So the Ming dynasty came a little bit after the Mongol or Yuan dynasty. And wow, Chinese trading ships, like a big Argosies group of trading ships. It's a Greek term origin, if I'm not mistaken. Well, it'd be named after Argo. This bunch of ships went. A little expedition, at least in legend. Wait for it. We're running a little rough. Anyway. Good. Gone. Good. So they made a little trip to the west coast of Africa. And, all sorts of people who don't understand history and geography, and I was talking about before. Learn a little bit of geography, learn a little bit of history, and before you start flapping your gums, okay? So my brother, for example, was a PhD. He was very enthused. He read this book. It must have been 1421 by some fellow, I can't remember. But oh man, you know, like history would have been very different if the Ming Dynasty hadn't pulled the successes of this one emperor, hadn't pulled the plug. China would have ruled the world. You know, they would have colonized Africa. Of course, that's without quinine. But who cares about reality when you can imagine and reimagine anything? Reimagine there's no heaven. You don't have to worry about these things. So you call it colonizing Africa. How would that work out? The Arabs were there already. You know, like they'd already gone down the east coast of Africa, at least a substantial way. So how come they didn't colonize Africa? They didn't have quinine. They got trade, they got slaves from there, but those would have been brought to the coast. Hence Zanzibar. Zanzibar was a big trading emporium, and but it wouldn't be subject to malaria the way the interior would be. Why? It's an island, and oceanic kind of climates tend to be a lot milder than stuff inland in the tropics. Yeah? So the Ming Dynasty, roughly 1400 when this Argosy's taken place. Oh, you know, like 1400 years or so, 1300 years before, people from the Roman Empire made it all the way to the South China Sea. What's going on? Marco Polo made it from Italy all the way to the Mongol Empire, the Yuan Dynasty. And he was before the Ming Dynasty people going. See, when the Ming people came down, when this Argosy went, you know, they were just following traditional slavery. The if I'm not mistaken, Arab and other Muslim traders had made it into the South China Sea. They'd made it to Africa. How is that materially different? You know, of course they're more centrally located, but they've done all this route that the Chinese are doing this way. But the ancient Romans made it, they'd gone further. And really, Marco Polo going on land, you know, how is it different having this big Argosy? I suppose, you know, it was supposed to have big cannons on it and stuff like that. You know, if you look at most warring ships, they're not big dumps on like a big rafts or something like sitting